Welcome to episode 58 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
Last week we did listener questions. This week, we're doing more listener questions. The cool thing about podcasts is they're conversations. Sure, Nicholas, and I talk to each other, but we always want to talk to you as well. If you have a question, we want to hear it, because if you have a question, chances are someone else has that same question. You writing in with yours helps us help everybody, and I'll remind you at the end of the show how you can send your questions in. First, though, we've already got questions for this week, and we're going to be talking about scam pop-ups that keep popping up, app-specific password requirements, issues with SS7, and finally some oddity around an email address. Now, Stephen starts us off today. I'm being played with a problem, and it does not matter how many times I run Secure Mac, it still happens. I lose my web page and get a page with audio stating all my bank and credit card info is being stolen. This overrides everything. I cannot get rid of it. I was also told that I passed on a virus to a friend. Can you explain? Sincerely, Stephen.
Well, we have actually covered this topic before on an earlier episode of the Checklist, but that sounds like what is a fairly well-known scam that has been around for a few years now. What happens is there is an ad on a webpage you're visiting, either intentionally an ad placed by the bad guys, or it is essentially malvertising where the site has been hacked and the owner of the site doesn't actually know that this code's on their site showing this stuff. But what happens is you'll visit the site and all of a sudden there'll be a pop-up, and it will, sometimes if your volume's on, it'll start speaking with your computer's voice saying, warning, warning, your Mac is infected. You've got 8,000 viruses. Click here to fix this. And the end result is that it'll either try to get you to download some, essentially what's fake antivirus software, where they'll want you to pay money to fix this non-existent problem, or it will be a call this 800 number and they will remote control into your computer and fix, again, the non-existent problem and charge you a bunch of money.
You put fix in quotes, right?
Yeah, fix is in air quotes. It is not, there's no problem with your Mac. The problem is going to be when you give those guys money. The reason this is tricking a lot of people, though, is because it will look like it's locked up your computer. It's usually some JavaScript running in the background on the web page that loaded the fake pop-up, and it won't let you click around. It's essentially given focus just to that pop-up. And if you click OK or cancel on the pop-up, it will usually spawn another pop-up and another one. And unfortunately, it makes it so your copy of Safari is unusable. There's an easy fix for it, which is just force quit Safari and then hold down the Shift key on your keyboard if you're on your Mac and reopen Safari while the Shift key is being pressed on your keyboard. That will open Safari in safe mode. It will not open web pages from your previous browsing session like it normally does, and it will basically stop the pop-up from showing up. Now, it's going to show up again if you go back to that website that had the bad ad on it. There are a couple ways that you can help mitigate the threat, which would be, first of all, installing a ad blocker or Safari content blocker. Something that will specifically block the ad in the first place, is if the ad is not loading on the page, it's not going to load the code that makes that pop-up happen. Otherwise, if it's not coming from an ad and it's coming from a website that's been hacked, if it's a website that you are familiar with, that you normally trust, go ahead and contact them. Tell them, hey, I'm visiting this on my Mac and I'm getting this pop-up. Could you check your server to make sure you haven't been hacked? Or check your ad provider to see why they're sending these fake ads. The ad providers themselves they're pretty good about cracking down on these bad ads, but then the bad guys just submit it under a new name, new account.
Yep, and somebody has to report them first.
Yeah, and they're really prevalent if you're trying to do naughty stuff online. If you're trying to watch that movie that's currently in the movie theater and you want to watch it for free on your computer, so you type in whatever blockbuster movie, watch free online, you type that into Google, and you click some of those links that appear. First of all, it's pretty remote chance that you'll actually get a chance to see that movie. You're just going to see a lot of these spam pop-ups. You're going to see a lot of things saying, hey, download this program and you can watch this movie. And
need the video player.
Yeah, download this video player update. No, and that's all fake. You're not going to get to watch that movie for free. In fact, you're going to infect your Mac with adware. Now, if you're actually downloading something and running something based off of one of these pop-ups, that's when you'd want to run some security software and go ahead and make sure that there's not actual adware or malware installed on your computer. If you're just seeing the pop-up appear when you're randomly surfing the web and it's not happening on every web page you visit, it's just kind of seemingly random, that is caused by either a hacked website or a bad ad on a legitimate website. And that's just kind of the price of surfing the web. It's not something that you can really avoid unless your ad blocker is really robust and is blocking pretty much everything. And even then, it might not stop that from appearing. And again, that doesn't mean that your computer's infected. If you haven't actually downloaded and run anything, it's just a scam pop-up. It's trying to get you to part with your money.
Let me ask a question, though. I know that when you're running MaxScan, and I assume this is true for other security suites as well, you can run sort of a customized scan, you can run a sort of general scan, and you can run a full scan. I mean, is it possible that he's got something hiding on his computer that hasn't been found because, in the interest of time, or because he doesn't think he has to, he's not running a full scan?
Generally, the default option for MaxScan, and I think it's the default for a lot of the security software, is what we call Smart Scan. And that's going to scan the locations that malware and adware is known to kind of hide itself. There are a few specific spots in the computer that essentially programs can put themselves in if they want to be running every time you launch your computer. And that is the location to check. And if something's not there, it's not able to be running every time you launch your computer. So, unless the person was like not actually running scans, if they were just looking for tracking cookies, for example, and they weren't bothering to run a malware scan, that would be one thing. And the kind of the signifier that you'd actually have a piece of adware versus the scam would be if you're seeing pop-ups on every single website you visit. I mean, you're seeing them on Google.com, you're seeing them on Apple.com, you're seeing them when you visit your bank website. If you're seeing weird pop-ups on every website you visit, that's an indicator that your computer actually has some adware installed, or technically your router could also have been hacked, but it's generally that you've got adware on your computer if you see that. And that would be the time to contact your security program provider and have them take a closer look, and they can usually run some tests and try and figure things out. Sometimes there is new adware or malware that's just too new to have been detected yet. And once the security companies become aware of it, they can create new malware definitions and allow the security software to detect it and remove it. But for the most part, with a situation like this, where you're kind of surfing the web and you see this pop-up, but you haven't seen a pop-up until that point, that's much more likely that it's just coming from the website itself, that it's not anything on your computer. It's usually pretty obvious when your Mac itself has some adware on it, because it's going to be showing those ads left and right.
Our next question comes to us from Bill. As of this past summer, he says, Apple is enforcing app-specific passwords for third-party apps that access iCloud data. These appear to apply principally to third-party calendar and email apps. In order to do this, one must also turn to two-factor authentication on one's Apple ID. Could you cover the rationale and the process needed to accomplish this? Please also address the question as to whether Apple two-factor authentication and third-party app-specific passwords are being enforced globally or just in the U.S. There's a whole lot of stuff there. What can you tell me about what Bill is asking?
Well, basically, Apple wanted to kind of lock down access to iCloud accounts to essentially Apple didn't want other apps to have your actual login information for iCloud, because they don't need that. Some apps were sending data insecurely to their own servers and then logging you into iCloud, and that's just not safe. So what they were doing was requiring these third-party apps to either integrate directly with iCloud via Apple's API, or creating an app-specific password that would essentially be created so you don't have to type your iCloud password into that third-party app directly. So if an app developer went through the App Store and went through the steps to actually access iCloud through the correct Apple API, it's not an issue. It's only for those apps that don't have it set up, essentially following Apple's best practices. And the app-specific password is going to be what it sounds like. It's specific just to that third-party app, and it's allows that third-party app to log into your iCloud account without actually having to know your iCloud username and password. So it's a security measure. You can revoke access to those third-party apps through your Apple ID management page on Apple's website, and it's definitely a security measure. In this particular case, you do have to turn on two-factor authentication for your Apple ID if it's not already on. With iOS 10.3 and newer versions, it was already enabled by default by Apple, so you don't have to worry about it, and it will prompt existing users to upgrade if they haven't already. So two-factor authentication should already be enabled if you're running the most recent version of iOS. Then there are some steps, and we can include a link in the write-up for this, but there's some steps to take then to generate the app-specific passwords and set them up for your apps. And you do that for every app separately that needs to connect to iCloud and that hadn't set up the Apple API stuff. And then if you do have to change your Apple ID password at some point in the future, it will automatically revoke all those other ones just as a security measure, and you'd have to regenerate them again at that time. I believe Apple allows up to 25 individual app-specific passwords at any given time, and as said earlier, you can revoke them on a case-by-case basis if need be. But this is just a security measure. I'm not certain, actually, and I wasn't able to see anything as to whether or not it affected apps globally or just in the US. I believe it's globally because Apple would want their security to iCloud to apply to every user who's using it. They wouldn't
across the board.
Yeah, they wouldn't base it on a location. So this is just a security measure. Again, any app that is using Apple's preferred method to connect to iCloud, the API and everything isn't going to have to worry about this. So you're not going to see it for all of your apps that have iCloud access. It would just be those apps that haven't taken that step to use the methods that Apple recommends.
Nicholas said in there that we will have more information about that in the show notes, and that's good because that was a fairly dense topic. I sort of feel like I got a bit lost there. So I'm going to give you the address now, and then I'll give you the address again later. It is securemac.com/checklist if you want not only to be able to sort of sit and go over those words a bit more thoroughly, but then also links to more information about it. It's securemac.com/checklist. And I'll remind you of that address and another address at the end of the show. Ooh, won't that be exciting? 2 addresses. I can hardly wait. I don't know about you. Harvey is up next. He writes in, your otherwise thorough show on authentication and authorization failed to discuss the SS7 cellular network flaw that enables someone with your cell phone number to receive your texts. This is a serious objection to using SMS as a second factor. In a follow-up episode, I hope you will discuss the implications of the SS7 flaw and specifically what factor you use instead, or what factor to use instead. Excuse me. You discussed hardware tokens, but not the SS7 context. Is, for example, the Ubicon key a better alternative? So asks Harvey. Let's take that apart a tiny bit. I am vaguely aware of the SS7 flaw Harvey mentions. Can you go a bit more in depth on that first?
Well, SS7 is Signaling System 7. It's basically a set of protocols that are used in telephone networks and in cellular networks, and they've been around for years. What they're meant to do is to allow your phone call or your text message to go from one carrier to another. So if you have AT&T, you'd obviously want to be able to text people, your friends and family who are on Verizon. Or if you have friends in the UK on Vodafone or whatever, you want to be able to communicate with people around the world. You want to be able to call them, you want to be able to text them, and SS7 allows that to happen. It also allows you to use your phone in roaming. You're using a different provider's network when you're traveling. You'd obviously still want to be able to make and receive calls. The telephone systems need a way to integrate with each other and kind of pass that call or text message through another system and still maintain the correct billing and data transfer. There are some flaws because, again, this is a protocol that was designed years ago and not necessarily with security in mind as much as we'd want it to be today. So there have been some news stories recently where there have been some flaws in SS7 that have allowed bad guys to do bad stuff. One of the ones I believe that Harvey was mentioning here was that in May 2017, there was a German mobile service provider, and they confirmed that some cybercriminals had exploited vulnerabilities in SS7 to bypass two-factor authentication in order to steal money from bank accounts. Now, this isn't necessarily a easy thing to accomplish, in the sense that you're not going to have some random teenager sitting at home who's magically going to look up your phone number online and steal your money. In that case in Germany, the criminals first had to install malware on people's computers. And then they had to have the login password information for the bank account and the phone number. So with that information, if you just had a login and password for your bank account and your bank didn't have the two-factor security, they could usually just, and they didn't have anything else stopping these, the bad guy could just get into your bank with that information. When you have two-factor authentication set up on your account, your bank is going to send you that one-time passcode to your cell phone number. And so once you've logged in with your username and password, then you have to enter that one-time passcode you got, and then you can transfer your money. Once the bad guys had that stuff in place, they had to get access to the telephone service. So they had to set up access to a fake telecom provider and then set up a redirect for the victim's phone number to their own lines that they control, the bad guys were controlling. And from there, they could log into the account with the stolen username and password and then intercept the text message. So
that's pretty smart.
it's smart, but it's not easy to accomplish. I mean, it was complex. They did it to make money, and they obviously had some money and skills behind it. So it's not a reason to say, two-factor authentication through SMS is complete garbage. We're going to throw it out the window because bad guys could technically do this. Yes, the flaws in SS7 are concerning, but they're not. It's one of those things where right now, two-factor authentication there are kind of a limited number of ways it can be accomplished, and the easiest way for most people is through SMS, because most everybody has a cell phone these days. That's the extra device for, second factor for authentication. There are alternatives. The listener mentioned the Yubico keys. That's it's a piece of hardware that would plug into your device. It's a little USB stick that could plug into your Mac or whatever, and it can kind of generate that one-time key used for security logins. It's similar to the RSA Secure ID we've discussed previously, essentially a hardware authentication token. The problem there is that not everybody supports it. Now, a lot of people do support Yubico hardware, and that includes Google supports it, Facebook supports it, a number of the different password apps support it, but not everybody supports it. So Mac OS, as of 10.12 with Sierra and higher, obviously High Sierra, supports it as well. But you're not going to be seeing as widespread of an adoption with it at this point. It's definitely something to keep in mind for the future as support is expanded, but it's not going to necessarily be able to replace all of your needs as far as SMS two-factor authentication goes, unless your provider is going to support it as an option. So that's definitely something where you need to research that and see if your provider does support it, because if they don't, then it's not going to help you out at all.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing any banks or financial institutions supporting it right off the bat.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, maybe you have to dig deeper, but it's not popping up for me.
Is that something we should go into a tiny bit more? Because, I mean, when you talk about RSA, what I think about immediately is on my phone now, I've got Google Authenticator. Is Yubico the same sort of thing, or? Yeah,
it's very similar. The Google Authenticator is essentially using your phone as the hardware token. Their app will generate that one-time key that you use to log into the service. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's the same type of thing. The Yubico key is essentially used to generate that one-time key, rather than the case of with SMS, where your provider generates the key and sends it to you, and then you enter it. It's something that's would appear directly on your phone through an app, or directly on your computer with something like the YubiKey. So yeah, that's a very, very similar functionality, and definitely it's more secure than sending it through text message. Mm-hmm. But again, it's something where you're going to have a provider that does support that as an option for the authentication.
John joins us to close out the day. A few days ago, I received an email from a friend and was about to reply when I noticed that although the username was correct, the domain was different. For example, her address, username@yahoo.com. The email I received was from username at yftd.il. I wrote her about this, and she replied in a couple of days that at least one other person had emailed her with the same info. I was curious exactly what is going on here. That is the question that John has for you guys.
Well, there's a couple of situations that could be happening here. Most common is the user got phished at whatever web-based email provider. They clicked the link, they logged in. They weren't really logging into yahoo.com or gmail.com. They were logging into something that looked familiar, and they supplied their information. And then at that point, the hacker at hand is able to download their address book and contact information from there, and then start spamming people in that person's name. And they have the first name, last name, and so making it look familiar, like the username at domainname.com, is a first step of trust right there, because people switch email providers. People have Yahoo, people have Gmail, people have AOL still, maybe. But it's just familiarity right there. So people will open it, they'll click it. It may be spam, it may be another phishing attempt to get the next person to do it, to gather all of their contact information. Because chances are, not everybody's email addresses are going to change anytime soon. So what better way to spam somebody than from it coming from a friend or relative? I mean, they know the name.
Now, in this particular case, however, it seems that it might not be a phishing attempt. Now, and Nick was completely right that normally a phishing attempt will try and make you think it's coming from somebody you know, but that return address really isn't the same person. And it's generally easy to kind of catch those type of phishing attempts if the bad guy's being pretty generic, because they're not the way the other person's typed their message doesn't seem like the way they normally do, and there are other kind of little flags there. In this case, however, that domain name doesn't actually exist. So because the person also said that she got an email from another friend who said, "Hey, the email you sent me had the wrong return address." It could easily be the case where their mail client got misconfigured. So they accidentally got into the settings or preferences for their mail client, and for essentially the outbound email address, the from email address, they basically made a typo, or a kid got in and typed gibberish on the computer or something, and all of a sudden their emails are going to be looking like they're from whatever, but the email receiving from different email address. And that's more of a case, I guess. It can act as a reminder that if you are sending emails to friends and family and you're never hearing back from them, but you're receiving email from them just fine, maybe check your outbound mail settings. Just make sure that you didn't actually make a typo. I've seen it plenty of times where we'll have a user write into us. It generally happens more when somebody's filling out an online form than when they're not actually sending an email, but they're just typing their email address into a form, and they'll make a typo. And it will be from .om instead of .com, or they'll mistype Gmail. They'll have two of the letters switched around, something like that. Now, that's generally something that in a support case where somebody's sending an email through a form online, that generally the person on the other end can say, "Oh, that looks like a typo. Let me double check and try and resend it." If you're sending email from your mail client, though, and all of your emails going out with the wrong email address because there's a typo in it, that's a problem. And I've also seen that as well in the past. So I guess it's one of those things that maybe it's not even, I wouldn't even call it spring cleaning. It's just maybe go ahead and double check to make sure your email address is sending out correctly from your mail client. Obviously, if you're using webmail where you're logging in on a web page, that's not the same thing, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you're using Apple's mail client or Outlook or any other mail client, and you are experiencing an issue where it seems like you're never hearing back from people when you email them, double check your settings.
And while you're in there, might as well check to see that you have a secure connection enabled for that as well.
I almost feel like both of your answers are correct. What I wish we knew was whether username at yftd.il was just like random stuff that he typed in as an example, or if yftd.il is the actual domain that was showing up. Because you said, Nicholas, that this domain doesn't exist. And what I'm wondering is if you just, fake the domain to give us an example. Like, it should say Yahoo. It actually says not Yahoo.
Or the other question would be what the actual content of the email was. If the person who sent it, if it was something they actually sent, and they know they sent it, that would be a real indicator that was just incorrect settings. If it was something they didn't remember sending, obviously that leads more to the phishing side of things.
So there are a few different options for you to check out there, John, and thank you very much for writing in. I mentioned earlier that I would give the place to find show notes again, and I'm going to do that now. Like all the shows, you can find notes for this episode and any future episodes coming up at securemac.com/checklist. Oh, don't look for the future episode notes yet. You'll have to actually wait for the future episode. But then, once that happens, securemac.com/checklist is the place to go. If you have questions, again, like John, like Harvey, like Steven, like I'm forgetting the fourth one, but everybody who's written in for the past couple of weeks, we would love to get those questions. Because, first of all, we'd love to address them for you, but then for everybody else out there. The address to do that is checklist@securemac.com. The address again, checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, do remember this. You are listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.